Right. Well, thank you everybody for having me. It's an absolutely great pleasure. And I'm having a bit of a moment of deja vu because in 2018, I stood on this very stage trying to make the case for the concept of investing in the blue economy. So it has been less than 10 years that we've been even talking about the blue economy as an investable topic. And maybe just taking you to my early journey. When I first moved into the role of sustainability after a nearly 35-year career in very traditional investment banking and capital markets, the very first thing I did with my new team was to have them map the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And the 17 goals were really trying to define the challenges and the most systemic problems, whether they be environmental or social, and frame them in some way that the global capital markets and other actors could participate in those sectors to help drive the outcome to achieve success across those various categories. And SDG number 14, which is life below water, was one that popped out because when I talked to my team, I said, where of these 17 goals is capital not flowing? Because maybe that's a good place for us to spend our time from an impact point of view. And SDG 14 popped up as the second least invested SDG, period. And that was a big shock to me because oceans give us the very breath we take. They consume and sequester a third of the world's carbon. They feed a quarter of the world's population with their primary source of protein, et cetera, et cetera. So if we don't have a healthy and thriving ocean, fundamentally, we don't have a healthy planet and we don't have a livable planet. So that was the challenge for me to set about trying to define this as an investable topic with my team. And I went around to all the asset managers and the impact folks and everybody who allocated capital, and they fundamentally told me oceans are uninvestable. And I'm a bit of a rebel. So as soon as somebody tells me I can't do something, I say, bring it on. We're going to get to work and try to figure this out. So step one was to actually quantify what the blue economy meant. And we worked with the UN, and we worked with the World Economic Forum, and we worked with many, many others to create the definition of the blue economy, which is effectively if you add all of the goods and services that have a reliance or contribute to the oceans, you come up with a number that would quantify or equate to about the 7th largest GDP in the world. That's investable, right? There's already money flowing there. But how do we define it in a way that we could attract more capital and mobilize it at scale? So let me give you a little bit of a success point here in terms of how that has moved since our very first conversations nearly 10 years ago. So coming from essentially an ill-defined category, we now see the funding or investment that is defined in the blue economy as a $3 trillion industry from an investment point of view. And then we go further and try to categorize that in terms of where have we mobilized capital. And you can see in these green bars that whilst it is small relative to the world's global capital flows, and Tim is 100% right, we don't have a capital problem. Often we have a definitional problem and we have a sink problem, meaning for those with a charter, either wanting to deliver high impact or commercial return or have liquidity requirements, we need to help those different pools of investors find the spots where they can put money to work to meet their objectives. So in the public markets, what we have seen is a massive interest through the ability to define and show use cases where you can deliver the return objectives of those investors. And you can see what happens when you create the definitions, when you can define a pipeline, and you can demonstrate returns. So 142% growth rate from 24 to 25. And this is in the midst of all the geopolitics and the global disruption and everything else, people are putting money to work in this sector. And then if you go way to the other end, the venture capital side, you see a 550% growth rate. So there is something here. So how are we creating this opportunity? As a bank like Standard Chartered, it may not be obvious. One of the ways we can often do this is to put those very definable market segments onto the map and create that investment enabling case. And we've done this in many cases through research. So I often think when you're trying to innovate around a new topic, number one, you have to have a common set of definitions. Number two, you have to have a common set of standards so that the market can have confidence in what they're investing in. And number three, you need to have that pipeline. So let me start with a very top left research report, very cute title, about seaweed. Seaweed, quite an esoteric topic. The title is Kelp is on the Way. Very cute title, but a pretty serious investment opportunity. Most of us don't even realize how much seaweed is in everything. It's in our toothpaste, it's in our cosmetics, it is in our vitamins, it is in animal feed, it is everywhere, but we don't really see it. But if you had actually invested in seaweed-dominant companies over the last decade, you would have had a greater than 20% return annually. That's right up there with tier one private equity in a sector that nobody knew was investable. So this is the type of thing that we can put on the map, and that type of investment, seaweed is, for Standard Chartered, very critical for us because we are a developing markets bank and 80% of our 52 footprint markets have a high dependency or reliance on the marine economy for the GDP health and prosperity of our countries and our people. And seaweed is a big part of it in really the frontier markets. So if you think of island nations or even a middle income, high growth economy like Indonesia, that is a big category, and yet nobody knew it was investable. So we put that on the map, and all of a sudden we're starting to see an enormous amount of interest in investing in this category. And then we went on to say, how do we generate a case for returns for something like ocean protection? So this is the real high impact side of things. What most people don't know, but scientists know very, very well, is often if you can leave the ocean alone for a while, nature has an enormous capacity to regenerate itself and come back bigger and stronger. So marine protected areas, and I have such a great amount of respect for His Serene Highness, has been a champion of creating marine protected areas to try to leave spots of the ocean alone so that around those areas we can allow the inside to regenerate and come back bigger, faster, and stronger. So we then wrote a report on the ROA, return on assets, of an MPA, a marine protected area. And we're seeing more and more interest on the high impact side of participating in providing this type of an opportunity so that once we do leave it alone for a while, you're protecting nature. And of course, nature pays infinite returns back to all of us. And on it goes. So then what did we try to do next is to say how, if capital is struggling to find out where it fits, how do we start categorizing the blue economy in some sensible order, and we can create a mechanism for matching investor interest with those categories of the blue economy that can generate those types of returns or liquidity requirements or maturity profiles or whatever it is the investment community needs. So let me give you just a couple of examples just to light some fires about where you could possibly think about investing. So one of my great beliefs in sustainability is we need a lot of financial innovation because existing financial structures and the way we think about returns or ecosystem benefits aren't really doing the job, or else we wouldn't be in this environmental crisis that we're in today. So how can we use the concept of financial engineering to think a bit differently? So that brings us to an experimental financial structure that we created on my team at Credit Suisse, which is called a debt for nature swap. What is one of the biggest systemic challenges that we have in the developing markets today? It's over-indebtedness of emerging market countries. It is a serious problem. And when you're a country that is spending virtually your entire fiscal budget on serving your interest expense on your debt, you don't have a lot of capacity to spend on anything else, let alone on nature or marine protection, which if you're an island nation, often is a very significant part of your GDP. Think of this beautiful place we're sitting in. How much of Monaco's business is around the ocean? All those boats out there, that's part of the marine economy. Now, obviously, Monaco is not in the same position as developing markets, but think about your island nation that relies on fishing, tourism, all of that for its economic health, and yet it can't afford to invest in it. Concept of a debt for nature swap is that an underwriter, like a bank, can go to a country and say, I'm prepared to underwrite a refinancing of your debt capital stack on the condition that we capture a portion of that refinancing and it is ring fence to invest back in the marine economy. That's exactly what that is. And for the first time ever, so we created that concept, and we did it the very first time for the island nation of Belize. That was very much an institutional type of product. We underwrote the debt and we syndicated out to institutional investors. Very first one was $200 million. Now we have an entire market of debt for nature swaps, which is about a $5 billion market today. And we keep innovating. So the one that you see on the screen here, I brought to Standard Chartered as I moved to my new bank. And we said, what if we can crowd in different types of investors to create more liquidity in this market? And we went to a great philanthropist, the great Lucas Walton, part of the Walmart family, who was very keen, passionate about the oceans, but had up to now hadn't found a way to invest behind this. He came in a second loss position in this structure. He gets a fee for providing a guarantee his family office investing. This is his commercial side, not his philanthropic side. And he's getting a fee for participating in the structure. And his view is he'll never be called on his capital. And he is doing something massive for marine protection. So that refinancing unlocked $125 million ring fence to invest back in the ocean to help the Bahamas actually service what it does best, which is activate the marine economy. Next up is biodiversity credits. How many of you are familiar with carbon credits? Yep, so everyone pretty much in the audience. The next generation of a carbon credit is biodiversity credits. Could we create a financial instrument based on preservation of biodiversity, which is a very serious problem right now, monetize investing in nature and nature ecosystem benefits for those who are doing it well? That's what we're doing in India's Palk Bay, is we are in a project right now where we are creating biodiversity credits and a framework so that the investment community can think about investing back in this very thorny subject, which traditional capital markets and investing would have a hard time finding a place to invest for return. And then finally, at the far end of the spectrum is very high impact, possibly less than commercial returns, but it is a really interesting ecosystem place to participate. Back to my seaweed construct. In Indonesia, we have many, many, many people in the seaweed economy, but they're at subsistence level living, and they're not making a substantial return. So what we're doing here is arguing that we can create real economy jobs by using our foundation to be catalytic capital to support upskilling and processing of seaweed. So rather than a commodity product which is subject to wild fluctuations and commodity swings, if we can put manufacturing facilities next to where seaweed is collected, we can increase the value of the product 5 times and trickle down that income into the people who are doing the work to collect that seaweed. Now we're creating an interesting ecosystem product which is not volatile because it is a higher value add product. So those are just some examples of how a bank like us can participate. And then I want to close to give you confidence that this is just not a fringe. This is becoming a massive market and a really interesting place to participate if you care about preservation and support of this gorgeous blue water. So on the left-hand side, an NGO organization called ORA, Ocean Risk and Reliance, is mobilizing banks like us to sign on to something called Back Blue. We now have $3.5 trillion of balance sheet that are committing to say if we sign on to Back Blue, that we will incorporate ocean finance and ocean decision-making into our loans, our underwriting capital, and how we think about delivering impact in our communities, societies, and for our clients. And then I always love it when participants take something that we create on a novel financing idea and run with it. So this isn't our thing on the right-hand side. This is AXA XL, who participated in our Bahamas Debt for Nature swap, going to one of the world's largest asset managers, Legal & General, who've now committed $1 billion to facilitate capital flow and velocity in the next wave of debt for nature swaps. So I'm thrilled that somebody else is taking that novel idea and running with it and converting that ripple into a wave. So I hope that I'm just lighting a little spark as we sit here in this beautiful marine-based economy to help you think about maybe ways that you as investors could participate from highly liquid capital markets instruments all the way to deep, high impact illiquid, but perhaps hopefully high return, and to Tim's point, that patient capital that's going to deliver outsized outcomes. So thank you very much.